Hey, what's up, family? We're continuing my series on the miseducation of black children. Please check out the other videos if you haven't. In this video, we're going to talk about how the education system creates sellouts. Now, what is a sellout? In this context, we'll define a sellout as any black person that works against black liberation and black power. Now that we know what a sellout is, who are the sellouts? And I'll tell you straight up, it's me. I'm the sellout. And so are you.
You think I'm a sellout? Why?
Because, of course, we're dealing with a global power, the global European power, and a global economy which is under the influence of course, under the control of Europeans and works to the benefit of Europeans. And it's in the context of that global economic power and the attendant military and other powers that the African personality is shaped. So hardly any African group, any significant African group escapes that shaping process. All classes of black people are servants to Europeans. And whether you're middle class, upper class, if there is one, a lower class, you're from the continent or from the Caribbean, from the American system here, the basic role is the same.
In other words, white supremacy is global and permeates every sector of society. Therefore, it's almost impossible for anyone on this planet, white, black, or other, to live and function without supporting and abiding by the white supremacist structure in one way or the other. You got an iPhone, you sold out Congo. You watch the NFL, you sold out Kaepernick. You got some bread and left for the suburbs, you sold out your hood. This is a white supremacist structure, and the only way to go up or get by is to get along. Now, we could go over money, violence, and the various other tools the system uses to keep us in line, but being that this is a series on education, that will be our focus for now. And the best example of how the system uses education to create sellouts are the Greeks. No, not those Greeks. These Greeks.
If you read what the Greeks said, not what we think, but if you read what the Greeks said, they said they got everything from Egypt.
Now, I found out that the Greeks, who were supposed to have been the founders of civilization because they were the first civilized white folks, but the Greeks got their civilization from the Egyptians, and the Egyptians were black people.
They got all their knowledge from Egypt.
Now let's step back and look at how problematic this is. Africans created the most advanced civilization in human history, from whom white Europeans copied everything. And now, today, here in America, instead of our best and brightest black scholars honoring our black foreparents, we honor the copycats. But again, we're all sellouts, not just Divine Nine. This video isn't to call them out, it's to fill them in. It's to fill all of us in, because this goes beyond fraternities and sororities. It's in every facet of our daily lives.
Do you understand the consequences of being in a culture where the entire culture, day in, day out, constantly while you are sleeping, while you are awake, is telling your story and building your internal knowledge base? Do you know the power of that? Do you know what it's like to have streets and areas of town and cities named in accordance with your history and speaking to the continuity of your history? Do you know what it's like to turn on TV and every time you turn it on, you're seeing stories of your greatness, your possibilities, your capability, your power, your effectiveness, your ability to lead the world, your ability to own the world, those stories constantly being told? Do you know what it's like every time you walk into a school, they're telling your story over and over and over and over and over again? Every holiday is telling your story over and over and over and over again. Every time you get together, you're celebrating your story. Every monument tells your story. Every symbol tells your story. Every myth tells your story. Do you know the power in that? Do you know what a handicap we are under? to have nothing around to tell our story? Don't you know you need to have that propaganda going through your mind day in, day out so you can learn to be black?
I was in the Intelligent and Gifted Children's Program. I went to Cornell University Preparatory. I was on welfare, Head Start, free lunch, free breakfast, forced busing for integration. Every single government program ever created, I have been
here you are on the cover of Newsweek magazine. It must have worked.
That's not the point, because I talked about white people. That was why I was on the cover. They were not celebrating my academic victories.
Your point is made.
Right. So my point becomes, Phil, that how you design those programs. In all of the programs that I attended, all of the education that I had, college, public, and otherwise, nobody ever told me that I was an African woman.
Do they know that they're the Songhai people? So the plantation owners who travel over there to seek his advice said, well, of course they know that they come from the great Songhai Empire. Well, that's your problem. You can't let them know that they came from greatness, from grandeur, from beauty, from sophistication.
The African is never to be presented in his glory. He's only to be presented as a sick man, a beaten man, a slave, or a colonial, or a primitive.
African American students have a 7% chance of seeing an image that's truly reflective of who they are in the American textbook.
So the plantation owner said, well, how can we prevent it? I mean, the mothers and the fathers would tell the children, say, you came from Timbuktu and you came from the city of Janneh and that's where we were born. And then the Europeans came over and invaded us in 1591 and marched us to the seas, to the waiting ship. Man, you can't allow them to teach that to their children. You'll never be able to control them.
An education that prepares black people to maintain European power as the central power in the world.
I was very ashamed of having African blood, very, very ashamed.
Education that ultimately insults the history and culture of African people.
Because nobody in my school, no professor ever told me anything good about Africa.
Blumenbach said, what you do, as soon as a boatload arrives, take the babies out the mama's arms. Send the parents to a distant plantation and work them to death and raise the children to believe that they came from a jungle.
All Africans were half-naked savages who came out of the trees. We were made to believe that. We believed that all the time. You cannot grow out of such images. You can never feel pride in any such image.
Nobody ever told me what the history of African people were.
Africa is the cradle of humanity. Once the cradle was placed in Africa, it never left.
In Africa and Africa alone is where you can find in the fossil record an unbroken sequence of human evolution from the first type 4 million years ago all the way up to the advanced and latest type Homo sapiens sapiens. Evidence of fossils of Homo sapiens sapiens, modern human beings in Africa, at least 130 to 140,000 years old. There are no fossils of that age of Homo sapiens sapiens anywhere else in the world. Modern human beings, all of us in this room, all 5.5 billion of us on this planet, appears first somewhere about 200,000 years ago in East Africa. So this is the reason why, if you're talking about an anthropological Garden of Eden, it is Africa and it cannot be anywhere else.
Modern humans, or Homo sapiens sapiens, began leaving Africa about 40,000 years ago, moving into Europe. It is this process of migration and adaptation to different environments that led to the development of various racial groups.
In Africa, the melanin in the skin screens out most of the ultraviolet light, but there's so much sunlight, so much of the time, that enough penetrates the melanin barrier for the needs of the skin to produce vitamin D. Not a problem. Different now when you go up into Europe.
It was as Homo sapiens moved into Europe during the last ice age, which lasted for about 100,000 years, that these physical traits began to change.
All of a sudden it's cold, overcast, very little sun.
The challenging environmental conditions in Europe encouraged evolutionary changes, leading to the gradual development of lighter skin.
What does white skin do? Well, in Africa, it kills you, literally, because you cannot literally stand the sun. I might add one other thing about warm adaptation and the so-called Negroid, quote-unquote, facies or facial morphology. We talked about the necessity to lose heat. Well, where do you lose most of your heat from? Mostly from your head. 85% of the heat loss comes from the head, which is why we have kinky hair, particularly peppercorn hair. What does it do? It exposes more of the scalp to the environment. You can lose heat better that way. Why do we tend to have thick lips? It increases the surface area of the face, improves heat loss. Why do we have broad flaring nostrils tendency? Why? Because it allows greater movement of air, and you have to understand you don't lose just moisture from the skin, you also lose moisture from the lungs. So all of these are heat adaptations to a hot environment. Absolute opposite in Europe. You have adaptations to a cold environment, an icy environment. White skin being the first and certainly the most distinctive aspect of that, which improves vitamin D utilization and cold resistance. But narrowed nose, what does it do? It warms inspired air. Thin lips, narrowed features, reduces the surface area of the face. Hair that lays down on the back of your shoulders, it retains heat on your head. So in other words, all of these adaptations are due to basically adaptation in a cold, icy, frigid environment. The Mongoloid underwent a similar adaptation, but in addition, the epicanthal folds would have been accentuated in order to protect the face, the eyes against the winds, and also the warm air of the face. The stockiness of body that is characteristic of Orientals or Asiatics, again, what does that do? It retains heat, as does the straight hair. And as Shekhar Diop suggested,
these three racial groups, the black, white, and yellow, existed during the last glaciation. Archaeological findings suggest that 32,000 years ago, there was a single homogeneous humanity, which was Negroid.
Black people are the original humans, and this is well known and has been well known for quite some time. However, they can't have us knowing things like this.
You'll never be able to control them.
But wait, it gets worse.
Moving beyond prehistory, we enter the historical period, which is characterized by the advent of writing. Once again, Africa, specifically Egypt, was ahead of the rest of the world.
Professor, I got it open.
The Nile Valley civilization developed a system of writing as early as the 4th millennium BCE.
This can't be, man. What? You know what this is? What is it, Buddha? It's the Book of Life. Book of Life. In the beginning, when man arrived on Earth, the black gods did leave their spacecraft, and they walked, and they named the beasts of the sea and the animals of the land. Heavens. And man in his blackness did walk the earth, making medicine. They discovered type.
The impact on mathematics was immense. The Africans had developed highly advanced astronomy and mathematics. The second of time is African. The division of the day into exactly 24 hours is African. The division of the week into the names of the week, the names of the days of the week are African. The decision to start the day at midnight is African.
The ancient Egyptians in the Pyramid Age 6,000 years ago knew that the world was round. They knew that it went around the sun in 365 and 1/4 days.
The Babylonian calendar only had 365 days. It was wrong. It was the African in Egypt who created the first accurate calendar, 365 and 1/4 days. That is very exact.
They measured the circumference of the earth and they calculated it so accurately until modern astronomers said their error was only 1 yard.
Buddha, oh, get this book out of here, baby. This tells the real team. Buddha, control yourself, don't you see? What you mean, Jack? Look at this here. Black people started the music and the brain surgery back in the year 3 BC.
As African civilization flourished, it passed its knowledge to the Mediterranean world. This period marked the second phase of Africa's contribution to universal civilization, where the values and advancements of Egyptian civilization were transmitted to Greece, and from there to the broader Western world.
It would take a book to fill the number of great scholars that came out of Europe to be fed and taught by the Africans.
The Greeks who traveled to Egypt, such as Thales in the 6th century BCE, acquired knowledge that they later adapted and passed down as part of their own intellectual heritage.
Pythagoras spent 15 years in Egypt, and what did he have to do? He probably had to spend 5 years convincing them that he was worthy to get the knowledge that they had.
Imhotep, the multi-genius that designed the pyramid of Saqqara, the first man to be a physician that even Hippocrates, the so-called father of medicine, is giving him credit and calling him the god of medicine.
Now, I found out that the Greeks, who were supposed to have been the founders of civilization because they were the first civilized white folks, but the Greeks got their civilization from the Egyptians, and the Egyptians were black people.
These were all black people got down. Wait a minute. There ain't nothing in here about whitey. This is ours, Jack. Wait till the brothers hear this.
It's really about learning the root words of where these come from and understanding that this is an African heritage that is also belonging to the people. Africa is in it, whether we want to dismiss it or not.
The impact of Egypt on Greece, which means the impact of early African civilization on European civilization, was profound.
And the Greeks passed their civilization on to the Romans. They couldn't retain it, they lost it. They had a dark age in Europe for 500 years. And then another bunch of Africans, the Moors, from North Africa moved into Spain and started civilization all over again. So instead of Europe civilizing Africa, Africa has civilized Europe 2 times. African history. The reason I'm talking to you about it is because it's not in the textbooks.
And you know why they don't put it in the textbooks.
You'll never be able to control them.
What if all black children were raised knowing that Africa was the cradle of civilization? Imagine how much more confident we would be, how much more ambitious we would be. Imagine how much more militant we would be. Well, they have imagined it. And that's exactly why they have us focused on ancient Greece instead of ancient Egypt. Oh, and it wasn't just Egypt.
The great city of Benin. At the end of the 13th century, a European traveler encountered the great metropolis. He wrote, "The town seems to be very great. When you enter into it, you go into a great broad street, not paved, which seems to be 7 or 8 times broader than the Wormhouse Street in Amsterdam."
And it was in Nigeria. They made interconnecting walls that stretched over 10,000 miles. But that's enough wall to circle the United States 3 times.
It says 4 times longer than the Great Wall of China.
Benin art of the Middle Ages was of the highest quality. Technically, these bronzes represent the very highest possible achievement, the great city of Timbuktu. Did you know that in the 14th century, the city of Timbuktu in West Africa was 5 times bigger than the city of London, and was the richest city in the world? The Mali Empire lived on under the rule of the richest man ever in the history of humanity, Mansa Musa. At the time of his death, Mansa Musa was worth the equivalent of $400 billion. At that time, Mali Empire was producing more than half the world's supply of salt and gold. At the height of its power, Mali had at least 400 cities. Many old West African families have private library collections that go back hundreds of years. The contents of the manuscripts include math, medicine, poetry, law, and astronomy. There is convincing evidence that the scholars of Timbuktu knew a lot more than their counterparts in Europe. Kumasi was the capital of the Asante Kingdom between the 10th and 20th centuries. Drawings of life in Kumasi show homes, often of 2 stories. The Manhaya Palace complex drawn in another sketch was similar to a Norman castle, only more elegant in its architecture. The Tanzanian city of Kilwa. A visitor in 1331 AD considered the Tanzanian city of Kilwa to be of world class. He wrote that it was the principal city on the coast, the greater part of whose inhabitants are Zanj of very black complexion. Later on he says that Kilwa is one of the most beautiful and well-constructed cities in the world. Ghana Empire. A Moorish nobleman who lived in Spain by the name of al-Bakri questioned merchants who visited the Ghana Empire in the 11th century and wrote this about the king. He sits in the audience or to hear grievances against officials in a domed pavilion around which stand 10 horses covered with gold-embroidered materials. Behind the king stand 10 pages holding shields and swords decorated with gold. Longo, city of Congo. Yet again, a vast planned city of linear layout, stretching across several miles and entirely surrounded by city walls, bustling with trade. Kanem-Bornu Empire. In Nigeria, the royal palace in the city of Kano dates back to the 15th century. Begun by Muhammad Rumfa, ruled 1463 to 99, it has gradually evolved over generations into a very imposing complex. A colonial report of the city from 1902 described it as a network of buildings covering an area of 33 acres and surrounded by a wall 20 to 30 feet high outside and 15 feet inside. Great Zimbabwe of Southern Africa. In Southern Africa, there are at least 600 stone-built ruins. Great Zimbabwe was the largest of these ruins. In the 14th century, the city housed 18,000 people, comparable in size to that of London of the same period. Gedi town of Kenya. Its ruins, dating from the 14th or 15th centuries, include the city walls, the palace, private houses, the Great Mosque, 7 smaller mosques, and 3 pillar tombs. A continent of kings, queens and great kingdoms. Until the end of the 16th century, Africa was far more advanced than Europe in terms of political organization, science, technology, and culture.
Man, they was getting down. This is it, brother. Everybody gonna know about this. We can change the history. Civilization will be changed. Yeah, this is gonna be it.
Get the bulldozers. There's nothing here.
In 1897, Benin City was destroyed by British forces under Admiral Harry Rawson.
Interconnecting walls that stretched over 10,000 miles. It was all man-made, and it was like the world's largest structure.
Very little remains today. How is that possible?
Because the British destroyed it.
All of it.
The city was looted, blown up, and burnt to the ground. The beautiful city of Kumasi was blown up, destroyed by fire, and looted by the British at the end of the 19th century. In 1505, Portuguese forces destroyed and burned down the Swahili cities of Kilwa and Mombasa. In 1571, Portuguese forces invaded Munyamutapa and started the destruction of the place. The beautiful city of Longo was destroyed by European fortune hunters, pseudo-missionaries, and other kinds of freebooters.
And they conquer you, they colonize you, they enslave you, they simply make your history disappear to make it look like they conquered, colonized, and enslaved nobodies.
The sad truth is that European invaders have destroyed most of the ancient African cities either as punitive actions or under the scramble for Africa's terra nullius law.
When people have a history, that makes you a somebody. So if you remove the history, you become a nobody.
During the scramble for Africa by Europeans, the main way to prove that a land was qualified for colonization or takeover was terra nullius, meaning land belonging to no one, which is used in international law to describe territory which has never been subject to the sovereignty of any state.
That's why conquerors, colonizers, and enslavers make the people whose history they've conquered, colonized, and enslaved disappear.
Many cities were abandoned when Europeans brought exotic diseases, smallpox, and influenza.
We can trace the history of syphilis around the world by looking at when the Europeans, quote unquote, discovered any particular area. If the Europeans got to Senegal in 1505, well, that's when syphilis came to Senegal. And if they got to Nigeria in 1506, that's when syphilis first appears in Nigeria. And if they got to South Africa in 1511, that marks the beginning of syphilis in South Africa.
When Europeans invaded Africa, they applied the 4 basic principles of any occupant forces. First, kill the strong and loot the place. Second, breed the weak. Third, kill, deport or exile the smartest and the most skilled ones. Fourth, impose the golden colonial rule, my way or the highway. The kings and their descendants were all killed. Additionally, 3 centuries of transatlantic slavery exported over 12 million of the finest men and women from Africa to America. Tens of millions have died in the process. Imagine what would happen to any country or civilization when almost all its writers, storytellers, engineers, craftsmen, artists, and leaders are killed or exiled. And any sign of their past glory and ingenuity destroyed or burned. Their books and records of knowledge were stolen or destroyed.
You know how much the Africans lost? Do you think you could take millions of people out of a continent, drag the youth, a whole generations of people out of a continent, smash it up, rip it, the guts and heart out of Africa, take away its wealth, take away its structures, and drag these people across the ocean, shatter them, and then say, well, look at the Africans, they never did anything when you take every blasted thing away from them.
Nobody ever told me that America is business, and without business you will have nothing and be nothing.
We've been misled by our leadership, for instance, that think that we can consume our way into equality and sees equality as an equality of materials. So if I have the same car as a white person, if I have the same house as a white person, you know, a similar job, then I'm equal.
Don't fight, just get money, right? That's what they want us to think, that individual wealth is the same as collective freedom. Nowhere close. They want us to believe that buying black is more powerful than fighting back.
But you cannot consume yourself into equality. You must produce yourself into equality, and you move into equality and beyond by productive thinking.
The reason we never had an economic structure in the country for black folk is for three reasons. One, we never had a national plan and a commitment to do it. Two is that whites are boycotting black communities, and three, blacks are boycotting their own communities.
This is what black people look like. It could represent black fraternities, sororities, black churches. And what you will notice about these beautiful, educated, and money black people is that everybody's doing their own thing. Caught up in a Eurocentric value of rugged individualism, survival of the fittest. It's a trick. There is no power here, brothers and sisters.
Everybody supports their own structure except black folk. That's why out of 36 million black folk, after 400 years in this country, you do not have one single solitary black business district in the entire United States.
The main purpose of education is not preparing black children for jobs. It is not preparing them to work for white folk. That is not the main purpose of the education of our children or our people. For if that is our main purpose, then it means another constant has remained in the world, and that's the constant of slavery under a different name. Now it's called looking for a job, with the same people having the jobs and the same people determining our wages. So you have a situation here where you may get more black MBAs, Masters of Business Administration, okay, more blacks who are economics majors, and yet you see the black communities crumbling economically. And often it means then that you will educate maybe a very brilliant mathematician who has Afrocentric ideas, but who in the end still must work for IBM and AT&T and the rest.
And they didn't lift you up, they lifted you out. So you couldn't carry anybody with you. Real evolution doesn't leave people behind. It builds a bridge back home, right? You didn't become better. You just became alone in a room that claps but never cares. We don't need to beg to sit at their table. We need to rebuild our table.
If you're talking about true change in the world, then you must educate yourself to create your own jobs and to employ yourself. To a good extent, many of our students go into schools, college as well as secondary levels, consuming, and their minds are not being developed to produce the true means by which they will accomplish equality. Everything else is shams.
This is where all the power is. Whether you're at the center of your own network or part of other networks, this is where all the power is. There's a beautiful African proverb that says that when spiders unite, they can tie up a lion.
And nobody ever told me how to organize business so that I would be able to develop institutions in my own community.
Shows all the schools, Atlanta U, all the money. That whole thing was built by the white man. I mean, he built it to the bone. It is not that he just controlled all them historically black colleges, but he has controlled the high schools, the grammar schools, and the kindergartens. Everything. He set it all up. He left none of it for nothing.
Because when the discussion about
objectives in education is being held, those discussions don't count on us as if we're people who can design anything, as if we're people who already had goals. The goals are being set for us.
The education of black people from 1619 right to this very moment has had this as a central tenet: training black folk to serve white folks' interest. Training black folk to be as productive as possible for Europeans, with the Europeans owning the means of production.
Remember, it was from slavery to controlled education. In other words, you were in fact just opening the cow out of a barn and sending them in to a barn house. He never really ever got a chance to roam free.
You know, the Freedmen's Bureau, if you read history, they will tell you they came in and they built schools for us. They built miseducation systems for us. They intended to close the independent schools down. Every time we've had an opportunity to have independent schools, the outside system tried to close the independent system down. That's documented. It happened when the Freedmen's Bureau closed down those 500 or 600 schools that Africans created that were African paid for with an African-centered curriculum. In other words, to invite a white person to come and evaluate the black high schools. And they did it, and they concluded that all those schools should be closed unless they could get a white board of trustees. So the record is clear. Every time we have an independent effort, the attempt is to close down the independent effort.
There was never a Negro school just for Negroes, by Negroes, Negro finance. There has never, ever been one, ever.
School too.
Ever. Though they bore our name and perception.
Howard University is a black university in name only. Those who fund an institution determine what is going to be done within the framework of that institution.
We think we're at the table because we see a black face, but never ask who set the table.
And so although Howard University is referred to as a black university and the majority of the student body is black and the majority of the faculty is black, still it is possible, I say it is possible, that those people who control the purse strings can say, we do not like such and such an ideology or philosophy that is coming out of this center. If this continues to come out, then we will not give you funds for building and we will not give you funds to continue the functioning of your center. Now you make your choice.
Though they bore our name and perception, we have never, ever had one.
African history. The reason I'm talking to you about it is because it's not in the textbooks. And it's not in the textbooks because we don't write textbooks. We have other people write the textbooks and they put that propaganda in there, and we are supposed to swallow it.
So now the sincerity of all of the programs and all of the education has to be questioned, indicted, and convicted, because the bottom line is that America is not and has never tried to produce African adults who are functional, self-sufficient, who understand their politics, their economics, and their relationship to the world politics and the world economics.
There you have it. The education of Africans the world over is not designed for our self-reliance and self-sufficiency. Instead, it's designed to create cogs in their machine, aka sellouts, the ones who are willing to play ball. But what about the ones who aren't? The ones who get rejected by the system. In this video, we talked about how the education system makes sellouts. In the next one, we'll talk about how it makes crash outs. Stay tuned. Please subscribe so you don't miss out.
You see, it's called a fourth grade syndrome.
They build jails based on fourth grade population reading level.
Studies show that black boys may be the best students in the country up until the fourth grade.
So if you aren't able to read by fourth grade, that's the projection that they use to build the institutions.
There are 3 critical stages in black boys' development: infancy to 9, 9 to 13, and 13 to 18. You see, it's easy to see the negative behavior here when he's already dropped out, laid up on some street corner lacking direction. It's more difficult to see it around 9 years of age, when they begin to sit further in the back of the class, when they begin to ask less questions, when their ball becomes more important than their book, when they begin to cheat on their tests.
The majority of millions of African youth in this country are dying mentally, dying spiritually, dying emotionally, dying academically.
We appeal to you to turn your sons and male students on early, teach them how to read early, teach them the beauty of being black and believing in God early. But many of us have waited, and we waited almost too late to develop black boys to be men.
You got to start early.
What? Are you serious?
I'm serious.
Failing in reading, we know they're going to be future inmates.
Yes, yes. If you don't put them on the right path to success. Because why aren't they reading?
I now want to ask you, what are some of the reasons you feel to explain why black students, especially black boys, were doing so well K through 3, and now scores decline in the intermediate and upper grades?
I never surrender to anybody, but I'm wise enough to know that if I walk out Washington, D.C. tonight, some black kid in Washington, D.C. is blowing off another black kid's head for a pair of sneakers because the institutions that we're talking about, not the things that we hold up to say, look, this is one example. The institutions that we're talking about are not saving the minds of those African children.